Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Esoteric. I got a fun and exciting episode for you guys this evening because we're going to be going over the new Super Nintendo port of the second Legend of Zelda game from NES, The Adventures of Link. Now this is definitely a divisive game. Some people love it, some people think it's a weak sequel. I'm somewhere in between. I remember loving it back in the day, but today I struggle a little bit more with remembering what I'm supposed to do. Now the great part is Infidelity has ported this over to the Super Nintendo. It runs on real hardware, on MiSTer FPGA, and on software emulation. Before we get too far involved though, do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe, and ring that notification bell. Definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined to want to support the channel, you got a Patreon link down below as well. But Infidelity's been absolutely crushing it lately with these Super Nintendo ports from NES games, and The Legend of Zelda II is absolutely no different. You'd have no idea you weren't playing this on an NES, that's how good of a port it is. Now currently there is no MSU-1 support, and that's going to be coming in later on down the line apparently if you listen to what he says on Twitter, and that'll be exciting as well to get some more soundtrack elements and maybe even some FMV video into the mix. But just seeing these ports, in my opinion, is totally fun. A lot of you in the comments seem to love them, but a few people don't understand what the intent of these is because obviously it runs on the NES, whether it's real hardware, software emulation, or the MiSTer FPGA core, and the real reason is why not? Why not have more fun with NES games on Super Nintendo? And so many of these ports get awesome enhancements with the MSU-1 chip. It honestly is nothing to lose and everything to gain when it comes to these ports. And honestly, The Legend of Zelda II probably needs and deserves a second look, honestly. This is one of those games that completely changed up the playstyle from the original for the most part, just like Castlevania 2 did, and people either loved that or completely disliked it. It was a very bold design decision from Nintendo to change to this format, and you can definitely see some of the lineage of things like this moving forward into Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. It's got a little bit of that Metroidvania charm before that term ever existed, and it was one of those quintessential Nintendo games back in the day. And the best part is, again, it is perfect on Super Nintendo. Between Infidelity's port as well as the sound emulation on the SNES, you're just getting all sorts of fun Zelda goodness on Super Nintendo for no reason other than the fun. And I can't wait to see what Infidelity ports next. Leave me a comment down below and tell me what you'd love to see come over. For me, I'd like to see some Castlevania games with some MSU-1 support. I think that would be great to kind of mix up the soundtracks. But like I said earlier, and if you missed the video, Infidelity's been on a tear. He just recently released his Mega Man III port over to Super Nintendo as well, and this was one of the best ports of 2024 so far in my opinion. He keeps taking these classic NES games, bundling them up onto Super Nintendo, adding a bunch of improvements, MSU-1 support, and then just sending them out into the wild for fans to enjoy and appreciate, and that is always welcome. And like I said, I get that this isn't a necessary mod, it plays totally fine on the NES, but why not do stuff like this? Fans love porting games to consoles they were never designed for, and getting NES library on the Super Nintendo is a great time because it can come with a lot of performance improvements as well in certain games. But tell me, did you enjoy Zelda 2 when it came out? If you played it recently, having popped this on my MiSTer FPGA and kind of played around with the port, I am definitely intrigued to try to go into the game further because it's probably been over 25 years since I actually beat this game. So it's one of those titles, now that it is ported over to the Super Nintendo, I'm a little bit more intrigued by it, and I do appreciate all of the systems having to collect different items in different areas to progress throughout the game, giving it that true Metroidvania feel. And honestly, these caves at the beginning, a little bit of a cruel joke on the designer's part. But again, you would never actually realize this was running on the Super Nintendo. That's how good these ports from Infidelity are. And don't forget, the Nintendo and the Super Nintendo really don't share any hardware in common for the most part. This is a completely new port over to new target hardware. It's not like the Super Nintendo was ever backwards compatible with the original NES. And I will say, as far as games on the NES are concerned, Zelda 2 holds up very well graphically in my opinion. Sure, it's definitely got that 8-bit age to it, but all of the art style, all of the colors really do work, and they look great on Super Nintendo. And the soundtrack, 10 out of 10 as well. Listen, and I'll be right back. Not only does Zelda 2 have a really good soundtrack, but it sounds exactly like you would expect it to coming out of the Super Nintendo, and that is no small feat whatsoever. Trying to get games to sound exactly the same across different sound hardware and different architectures is no easy feat whatsoever, so the fact that this sounds exactly like it should if you're playing on an NES means that the team has done an absolutely spectacular job of converting everything over, pivoting it to Super Nintendo, and just making it feel like it belonged here in the first place. Now, some people talk about these ports and say they wish there was improved graphics, and I totally understand that, but honestly I feel like Zelda 2 with the original 8-bit NES look is the way I would want to play the game, because redoing all of the artwork really isn't so much of a port as it is a remake, and I think people get a little muddled in the definitions. When you're porting a game from one console to the other, normally you're just basically trying to get that game to run on that hardware. Sure, with the MSU-1 features that can be added in the future, you can get better soundtracks and FMVs, but a port's going to bring the original game over to new target hardware, where a fan remake would take something like Zelda 2 and basically just completely change the graphics, redraw the backgrounds, and give you the exact same storyline and gameplay, but with a new complete visual look. So you tell me down below, would you rather have that remake or do you like the ports better? For me, I love the ports. I just like being able to play games in ways they were never intended on doing, and honestly I think this game just has a lot of charm and flair in its 8-bit version. And it is one of those titles that just changed so much, it does feel like a completely different game, even if that is just Link on screen. The side-scrolling versus the overhead map for the most part, the dungeons being these more linear affairs, it was definitely, again, a very strange game to come out with as a sequel, and I will say definitely a much harder game in my opinion than the first. But of course you do get the map screens, you do get to fight enemies within here, so it kind of feels like the evolution of the original formula of Zelda, but of course when you got to Link of the Past on Super Nintendo, Nintendo went back to what worked with the original game on NES, so this title again kind of just doesn't get as much love as it could probably deserve, and maybe having this ported over to the Super Nintendo will make more people take a look at it. Because I do remember playing this back in the day after I played the NES original as a kid, and I too was kind of confused and let down by what the game is doing, so maybe it's something in a more modern lens we can take a look at and appreciate more. And the best part is now with the port you can do that on Super Nintendo. If you have a flash card you can just load the files up and you'll be totally fine playing those. Playing on MiSTer FPGA works great as well, and I do know this works on pretty much any Super Nintendo software emulator out there. And I've always wondered, the joke is what's going on in that cabinet and how Link gets healed. Really not sure, but he definitely likes to heal often if you know what I mean. But this is just another awesome port from Infidelity, and I love that they are out there just doing these things, bringing over games to non-target hardware, in a lot of instances giving them improvements with MSU-1 and just kind of bringing them to a new audience. It is definitely not a necessary mod, but honestly what mods really are necessary? The game exists, you can play it, so anything else is just icing on the cake, and that's definitely something to be celebrated. If I saw another MSU-1 port though to Super Nintendo, I'd really love to see the original Battletoads come across the Super Nintendo, and I did look, I didn't see it, but it's very likely to exist and I just didn't notice. But if you're at all interested, you can download this today. I will leave a link to Infidelity's Twitter down below. He tells you how to go ahead and get all the files you need to play the game, and it definitely is worth checking out. And I can't wait to see, once a revision 2 of this game comes out with MSU-1 sound support, what it could possibly sound like. But The Legend of Zelda 2 is here today on Super Nintendo. 10 out of 10 port. You should definitely play it, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.